patriotism, faith, national unity, education, fiscal responsibility, civility, the values that define America. Fascinating stories and talks from America-loving patriots dedicated to preserving freedom, opportunity, and justice. Welcome to the Friends and Fellow Citizens podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Friends and Fellow Citizens. I'm your host, Sherman Tylowski. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you will enjoy it. I've got one announcement to make for all of you before we dive right into our conversation today. I am so pleased to announce that Friends and Fellow Citizens has made its first appearance on another podcast. I was very grateful and privileged to be on a show called What the Politics. It's a podcast started by two journalists from WNCT News, based in Greenville, North Carolina, in that region. And they did an amazing job hosting me, having me on one of their episodes. And I'm so pleased to be able to share a little bit about not just what we had discussed in that episode, but even just sharing a little bit about Friends and Fellow Citizens. So I hope you will tune in. If you go to my website, shermantylowski.com, you can go and click on the press tab, and you will be able to see and will be listen and read the article that was featured on WNCT. And once again, I want to thank Victoria and Emily, the two hosts on the show. They were incredible. And I encourage all of you to take a listen to their podcast. It's called What the Politics? Question mark, exclamation point after politics. And I hope you will subscribe to them because they do an amazing job. So I want to thank them so much for giving me that opportunity this past week. Now, on to today's episode. Today we will be sharing a little bit about serving those who have served our nation. And I'm talking about veterans. Veterans have done so much for this country, and I'm so pleased to have a guest on who has had firsthand experience serving America's veterans, but also serving herself as a member of the armed forces. Danielle Skranak is the reigning Miss Gilbert 2020 and will compete for Miss Arizona 2021 later this summer. She is the first disabled veteran to compete for Miss America, having served 2 years in the U.S. Army as a military police enlisted specialist. Now she serves her community through her nonprofit Friends in Service of Heroes, providing aid and assistance to local veterans. As Miss Arizona 2021, Danielle hopes to create legislative reform to provide a better quality of life to the over 50,000 disabled veterans in Arizona. And now we'd like to welcome our guest. Danielle, welcome to Friends and Fellow Citizens.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start off with your military background. This part, I think, is just so inspirational, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted you to be on the show, is because I think you have an incredible story to share. Could you share a little bit about your military career, please?
Yeah, so I joined the Army at the ripe age of 18. I shipped off to boot camp. I had a ton of goals that I wanted to accomplish in the military. I wanted to be, I wanted to go up the ranks. I wanted to lead a team. I wanted to join the Ranger community. Like, there were so many things that I had planned for myself. And when I came from a fifth generation Army family, you really have those goals in mind. So I left for basic training, and 2 weeks out of the 10 weeks of training, I occurred in an injury, an accident, total freak accident, landed directly on my head onto concrete, and I was later diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury. So all of those hopes and all of those dreams came crashing to a halt. I ended up forgetting my whole life, so I had long-term and short-term memory loss. And then I had trouble remembering words, which is called dysphagia. And so it was a long journey to get all of that stuff back and kind of regain normalcy. And since then, I have just kind of really rallied and advocated for other traumatic brain injury disabled veterans like myself. And I have started my own chapter of a nonprofit to do so. And now I'm having some more exciting things in the works that I can't necessarily share just yet. But yeah, that's pretty much been my military career.
I, I don't think anyone here can really imagine what it's like to go through something so scary. Just realizing that you won't be able to replay those memories when you were younger. What was the feeling like coming out of such a horrendous injury? Um, can you share a little bit about kind of your feelings during that time?
You know, most people in my position would probably say, yeah, I had tons of friends and family that supported me, but really I didn't. You still have to finish basic training, and no one really knows you there. No one really cares, especially when you're only 2 weeks in. I had some good friends in basic training, but I'm not really friends with any of them now. So it wasn't like a really close friendship. So you're pretty much alone. And when you don't remember stuff, it's just makes it even worse. I mean, you really feel just really isolated. And so for the rest of the 8 weeks, it pretty much sucked. And then I went home for what's called holiday block leave. And I met my family basically all over again. And it was so weird because at that point I was 19. It's just bizarre to be like, oh, yeah, this is your Uncle Ivan. So it was just really weird. Then I went back to training, was another 9 weeks for what's called advanced individual training. And that's for like your specific job in the Army. And then I went off to Fort Leavenworth to work in the prison there, and still alone. No one really knows you. No one really cares to know you. You're kind of at the bottom of the totem pole. You're private in the Army. So it was a very, very interesting experience, but I learned so much from it. I came from a small town, and I just was so used to being able to rely on everyone. Everyone is your friend in a small town. You can always count on your neighbor for, a teaspoon of sugar or a glass of milk, whatever you need. But it's not like that out there in the real world. And I really had to learn that fast. One thing that I really took away from that, though, is just being able to depend on yourself and learn how to be an independent person. I think that's something that my generation really needs to focus on too right now, because I feel like we've become a very codependent generation. So learning that and just, finding my footing in the military and as an adult in life, that was really helpful.
Wow. And I want to now move on a little bit to your organization, Friends in Service of Heroes. My understanding is that that was also your platform too for Miss America. So
Yeah.
let's start with Miss America for a second. Then we'll go a little bit more into some of the advocacy work that you've been doing. But first of all, how did you get started with Miss America organization and eventually compete and win your title?
Yeah, so there was a flyer in high school. Again, I'm from a small town. There's a flyer in my high school and says, are you an outgoing, caring individual? Do you want to be the next Miss Crook County's outstanding teen? And I was like, I don't know what this is, but I really want to try it. So I did at 15. And I showed up. I didn't win. And that's when I learned that winning is not everything. Because, sometimes you see on those TVs where the pageant girl doesn't win the crown and it becomes this, big drama, the climax of the movie or the show. And that's kind of what it was for me, too. I'm not going to lie. I was pretty upset. But then, as you get older, and I joined the Army, and I, had the traumatic brain injury accident, and you kind of grow up a little bit. I rejoined it after Jacqueline Thomas, Miss Arizona 2019, came into my office and told me all about how she wanted to be Miss Arizona. And then 6 months later, she won. So then after she won, 3 months after that, I won Miss Gilbert, which Gilbert is my hometown, a small town in Arizona, and I love it to death. I'm so honored that that was my first America local title. And yeah, I kind of just ran with it, and I've had a really great time being Miss Gilbert 2020, and I can't wait to see what else happens next.
That's amazing. And what a coincidence that Jacqueline had did an episode last year in October 2020 where we discussed a little bit about the women's rights movement way back in the days of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, and
Oh, wow.
how it was just an amazing. We actually did a two-part episode, and she appeared in part two, but it was a really special episode. It was my first kind of big episode that we did, and I'll never forget the amazing interaction that we did. So I just think it's such a coincidence. It's so great to have both of you on Friends and Fellow Citizens now to share your stories and the kinds of leadership roles that you've taken. I want to ask now about Friends in Service of Heroes, or the acronym FISH. Tell us what it is and what you've been doing with it.
Yeah, so Fish started in about 2008, 2010 by Paul Chapa. It was him and a few of his coworkers who work in the food industry, and they are initially called the Food Industry in Service of Heroes. It has since deviated away from that, so it didn't include just food industry companies donating to give service dogs to veterans. Now he changed it to Friends in Service of Heroes so that he can include everyone in the community that wants to be a part of it. And it has grown. He started this in Kansas City, Kansas, and I started my chapter in Phoenix, and then someone else started a chapter in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And essentially what Friends in Service of Heroes is all about is about giving back to the veterans. That can mean if they need a car, we'll go out and find them a car. If they need gas money, if they need a wheelchair, whatever that veteran needs to succeed in their life, we will do whatever it takes to make it happen.
You know, my impression of veterans organizations is that it does feel very community based. Did you ever feel that as you've been working with Fish throughout this time?
Yeah. I'm really astonished by how many people have taken interest just in me starting Fish by myself in Phoenix. Which, if no one is familiar, Arizona is home to one of the largest groups of disabled veterans in the country. So it's very just enlightening and just makes me feel really good that other people are taking interest in, providing back to those who have served our country.
Well, first of all, I think this organization sounds really amazing, and what they do every single day to help those who've served our nation, I think is incredible. My understanding is that you've also done so many other activities, different kinds of organizations that you've supported and led or helped lead. Share with us maybe one or two more that you find incredibly inspiring as part of your veterans assistance portfolio.
Yeah, there is a organization called Grounded No More in Mesa, Arizona. They have been just phenomenal. They provide free flights in a World War II aircraft for veterans, totally free of charge. And I was lucky enough to do it myself in December. And let me tell you, that was just the most exhilarating 45 minutes of my entire life. I mean, I just felt super special. I just felt like I was back in the military all over again. And as a veteran, I feel like we're all just trying to search for that feeling again, if that makes any sense. We're just trying to feel that sense of purpose once more, all over again. And Grounded No More did just that. There was another company, Kendra Scott. Kendra Scott has provided about $2,000 to Friends in Service of Heroes, which is amazing because a service dog cost about $8,000 to adopt and train to that veteran's specific needs that they have. Who else? Just regular donations, through the Facebook donate button app. And then word of mouth has always been really appreciative too, just so that we can raise those funds because service dogs in wheelchairs are the two biggest things that we give out at Fish. And they're the most expensive items that we could possibly give out. So we're very thankful for everyone that volunteers and donates. And I really hope that with COVID kind of dwindling down, that we can get more of those corporate donations as well.
Yeah, that description that you provided, flying in a World War II era aircraft. I mean, I really want to be on one of those because I, in a way, I kind of wish that maybe if I were to go to the Air Force Museum and Wright Air Force Base in Ohio, I think that'd be kind of cool
Yeah.
to offer that. Although there would be probably so much demand for it. I
Oh, I
don't think there'd
know.
be
I
enough
know.
World War II aircraft to carry all the people who are interested in 2021. But I love the kinds of things that you're bringing up, about the different kinds of missions, and there's so many categories, it feels like, which is, I think, one of the great things about public service is that even within the much broader term public service, there's all kinds of ways that people are doing to serve others. I want to ask you kind of just more broadly. I mean, as you're still developing your career. You've had a career already in the military and doing advocacy. You still got so many years ahead of you, and no doubt that you have huge sights you're going after. What are the kinds of things that you want to look forward to when it comes to putting together, your career and expanding the portfolio that you've built already?
Yeah. So I got pretty lucky after the military. I always knew from a young age that I wanted to work in a legal career. I read just the most bizarre books as a child, like the O.J. Simpson's If I Did It book. I used to read like Lawyers for Dummies, just the most random things kids could possibly read. And I just loved it. I've always been fascinated by it. And I had just gotten out of the military. I came across this article about a legal position in downtown Kansas City, which is where I was stationed. And I was just like, I'll just apply and see what happens. And I ended up getting it. They ended up continuing to train me. I went from like receptionist to legal assistant to paralegal all in 1 year. And now I'm still a paralegal with a very exciting opportunity on my horizon. I am talking, this is like a dream paralegal position. So I'm kind of crossing my fingers. I don't want to give out too much information yet because I don't want to jinx it. But if I get that position, I would probably be there for the rest of my life. I mean, that's how big it is. So, yeah,
Well, we'll definitely have to stay tuned for that. So many
I know.
surprises. And that's funny you brought up Lawyers for Dummies. I feel like Dummies for the For Dummies series can apply to me a lot for sure on a lot of things. I'm just kidding. I always tell people the only aspect of the legal profession I know is lawyer jokes. That's all I can do. That's the
Oh my
best I can
goodness.
do. So,
Well, none of
uh,
my attorneys that I've ever worked for are funny, so maybe they should read that.
yes. So anyway, I want to move on to some of the issues that are facing veterans nowadays. We mentioned earlier about some of the opportunities that you've been involved in, some of the organizations that you know, but there's kind of some bigger issues, more generally speaking. And yeah, there's so much to unpack here, and we only have a certain amount of time in this episode. But if you could think of maybe, let's say, the top three veterans issues, most pressing issues that you think are facing the United States, what would they be and why?
Well, first and foremost, I would definitely say it's the veteran suicide rate. I know a lot of us know it as 22 as too many, and that number is still roughly the same. I know it's between 20, it bounces between 20 and 22 soldiers kill themselves every single day in America, which is just way, way too many. It's unfortunate. I know there are services out there to provide to veterans. The town of Gilbert is working with Be Connected AZ to help veterans find the resources that they need so that they don't feel like that taking their life is the answer. And so that's an astonishing breakthrough. The second issue I would think is about invisible disabilities. I know a lot of my friends, including myself, are often judged because you can't see my disability, even though it's very well much recorded with the Department of Veterans Affairs. And that takes a toll on people's mental health, is when they're being judged by whether or not their disability is visible or not, can have a significant toll on them. So there's that. And then also, of course, as we've all been talking about, is women in the military. That in itself is a huge issue. There isn't gear that is, for our body types, and we're often overlooked in promotions and other, really nice positions within the military. So that's another huge issue that I hope is tackled before I pass away from this earth, because I saw it firsthand. And I mean, those three, it's hard to rank one over the other, but those are the top three issues I think we're facing today.
You mentioned 22 number in terms of the number of average suicides that we're seeing among veterans. It really is. It's such a difficult number to grapple with. That number kind of sticks in my mind, and I'm sure I'm speaking for a lot of people out there too. What do you think are the reasons behind this high number? One is too many for sure, but why do you think this continues to be a recurring issue that we're in many ways still trying to struggle to fight and resolve?
Yeah. I think it has a lot to do with just there's a lot of uncertainty that comes with being in the military. Sometimes you don't know when you're going to go home again. Sometimes you do know, but it's a long time from now. That takes a big toll. I had two friends who killed themselves when I was serving, and it was because they just doesn't know when they were going to go home again, and that took a big toll on them. When you come from a small town, you are jumping out of water by joining the military and traveling around the world, which sounds super exciting when you're 17 years old. But when you're 19 or 20 and you're finally doing it, and you haven't talked to your family in a really long time, it just isn't what most people were expecting, I guess. Another big reason is because you feel so isolated. I know we talked about it earlier with just myself in general, having a traumatic brain injury, and I still didn't get special privileges. I had the same sets of rules that I had to abide by just like everyone else. Just because I had a brain injury didn't mean that I got that extra 5-minute phone call. It still meant that I had to hang up the phone at the 10th minute, because you only get 10-minute phone calls. And so there's just a lot of dynamics, a lot of moving parts. Everyone's story is different, and everyone's ability to handle stress is different too. So it's just hard to tell where it's exactly stemming from for each individual person.
As someone who's never served in the armed forces, your perspective, as well as the perspective of many others in the armed services, is so valuable. It should be more valuable nowadays more than ever. This kind of leads me to my next question, which is about the various different issues that are facing disabled veterans nowadays. You think that there's a bit of a knowledge gap between the kinds of issues that are facing disabled veterans versus the amount that people know in general about the extent of these problems and what we can do about them?
I think it has a lot to do with education. We all see military, men and women as those heroes and those go-getters and those people who are unbreakable. And I think it has a lot to do with the propaganda that stemmed after World War II. But I think people just need to realize and understand that we're all human. We're not Iron Man. We're not Wonder Woman. We have issues that we need to overcome. And sometimes that means coming back from Afghanistan or Iraq broken with no limbs, 2 limbs, all 4 limbs, but severe PTSD, but you can't see it. People are just not aware that invisible disabilities exist. And I think that's where the problem is.
How valuable do you think oral histories of these veterans you think could be for Americans across the country who want to help?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In fact, I did a digital speaker series last year highlighting quite a few soldiers and their stories about it, because it's very severe for them to come home and not talk about it at all. It's not only therapeutic for them to, go through that story again, which I know sounds a bit bizarre, saying it just, point blank, but them being able to go through the story again is very therapeutic for them. It's not only therapeutic for them, it's therapeutic for their families so that they can understand what they went through, and then also helps and educate children and young adults who are watching so they can make an informed decision about whether or not joining the military is right for them.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that. I've heard from historians and psychologists and those in the military and others who brought up this idea before as a way to help disabled veterans and to inform people more about what it's really like to serve in the armed forces. And now you brought up the last issue about women in the military. What do you think is kind of the biggest hurdle right now for women who are either in the military right now or those who are thinking of serving?
I think it has a lot to do with people's misunderstanding of what women are capable of. So there has been like this hot talk in the news where someone was commenting on flight suits and something like that, and it's just kind of ridiculous to me. It's like, why wasn't a flight suit created in the first place? Why are we all wearing men's clothing, men's IOTVs, men's helmets, men's everything, and there's two genders. I don't get it. There should have been, stuff created for women as women had been allowed to enter into certain MOSs, which is jobs for military slang. And it's just kind of ridiculous. I think that, the fact that women haven't been able to be military police until about 25 years ago is crazy, because I'm 25 years old and I could definitely imagine my mother doing what I'm doing now. So I think it's just about people's misunderstandings about what we're capable of and what they think we're not capable of.
Yes, and no doubt that we'll be revisiting, I think, the subject, and I think there's a long road ahead on being able to ensure that our military, composed of men and women, can be as ready as possible to serve in our armed forces, to be able to carry out what they intend to do and what our country needs at this time. Now, this is something that we, before our podcast recording, maybe didn't touch upon a whole lot, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about the VA. I mean, I think the VA it's a very complicated bureaucracy. I think there's multiple sides that you can take to look and see how to improve it. But what do you think are your kind of general impressions of the VA, because of its effectiveness, and anything that you'd like to share about the importance of having some kind of system to serve our veterans so that they're not left behind by our country?
So I have to be very careful here because my exciting news involves the VA and I don't want to step on any toes. But in my personal experience, there have been some issues that I thought could have been addressed a lot better than they had. So as a disabled veteran, you get compensation and benefits as such because my injury occurred on the clock in the Army. And there have been a lot of times where a mental health appointment could have came a lot sooner. For example, I needed a mental health appointment in October, and the first available mental health appointment in my area, which is Phoenix, which is the 5th largest city in America, wasn't going to be until almost 2021. So about 3 months later. Had I not been of sound and capable mind, I could easily see where a veteran might see that as a shut door and want to take his or her life. And there have been numerous reports of veterans taking their lives in VA parking lots because they were turned away at the door to be seen for medical care. There is some potholes in the VA system. And I think it's going to take a lot of fixing. I don't think that this is something that one administration can fix. We were very lucky with the previous administration where we were granted the Patriots Act, where we were given the choice to see a VA doctor or a civilian doctor at no charge to us. But even that had flaws because I also tried to use that, and that had flaws. I was later billed for the doctor's visit. The VA is telling me that they won't pay for it. It's a whole mess. But we've come a long way, I think, since 2005. And I think that we still have a lot of room for improvement to grow.
I think we all are just really saddened by some of the news that can come out of the VA, kind of the things that you pointed out, where we've seen technological difficulties and patients being turned away, or just for whatever reason, there's some poor treatment happening. And it's a really hard balance. And I will just personally say that I think being the VA secretary, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, currently Dennis McDonough, but I think every single one has probably had one of the hardest jobs ever because of this bureaucracy that you have to manage. And the bureaucracy that you manage compared to the imperative that you have to meet, the high bar that not only you set, but also what the country sets as well. Even though VA secretaries have largely been been confirmed on bipartisan basis. Secretary Shulkin is one who was confirmed 100-0 back in 2017. I mean, how much you think Democrats and Republicans should be really ramping up on their oversight and continuation to ensure that the VA can be as efficient for our veterans as possible?
I think it should be a bipartisan issue. I think the Department of Veteran Affairs should concern both parties. It shouldn't be, it should be Republicans' just responsibility because they're more pro-veteran or, something of that nature. That's just silly. And also people need to realize is that the Department of Veteran Affairs is the second largest federal entity in the country. It's not just one problem, one solution is going to solve all the problems. There's a lot of things that need to be fixed. The infrastructure via personnel and electronics needs to be fixed. I've gotten calls from the VA and it was the most unprofessional sounding voicemail I've ever received in my life. Also, I called on Monday to set up an appointment. I mean, literally this past Monday to set up an appointment. And I was told to call back in 2 days. Like, what? What is happening? Why do I have to call back? I already paid for this service. You should be calling me back when it's appropriate for you. So, I mean, there's just a lot of things that need to be changed. But unfortunately, it's going to be a long way before that can happen because there's just so many problems, so many leaky faucets. It's never going to be turned off with one.
A really good message that from you, Danielle, to Democrats and Republicans. I hope that our leaders recognize the bipartisan nature of the VA, and I have no doubt that there will have to be some kind of more, not just managerial leadership needed, but really about a vision. Where do we want the VA to be in next 10, 20, 30 years, or maybe 50 years from now? Something definitely to look into as we move on in this podcast. Now I want to tie everything in that we've discussed so far today. In about 30 minutes of conversation today, I want to ask Danielle if you could pick one or two of Washington's principles, the six out of the six principles that I often outline and include in my episodes. If you could take one or two and see if you can apply that to our conversation today, which one or two would you pick and why?
Oh, well, certainly patriotism, because this country would not be the way it is had we not had all of those patriots who fought for us in World War II. And secondly, I think it has a lot to do with national unity. We need that we need that now more than ever in 2021. This last year has just been so crazy, and I feel like we have divided more than we have come together. And I really hope moving into 2021, into the latter half of 2021 and into 2022, we really focus on what our country needs, and that is less division and more love.
That's an excellent answer. I just want to throw something in there about education, because that's something you brought up as well earlier in this episode. And how would you bring about education as a principle, as a pillar for the kinds of things that you're doing nowadays?
Yeah, absolutely. I tried really hard as Miss Gilbert to work with local school districts to teach kids about what happens when a war ensues and what the consequences are when soldiers return home, because I think they often see those homeless veterans on the street corners asking for money and kind of don't give it a second thought. But we really need to take care of our veterans when they come home. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is if we educate each other on what those veterans' needs are, what triggers could be for them, and how they can provide help as civilians.
One of the reasons why politicians matter so much to American society is because they also decide where we intervene in our foreign policy, which wars we engage in, how many troops we deploy in country X. How much importance do you feel about ensuring that our leaders understand veterans' issues, understand the effects of going to war before they make those decisions on where our armed forces are to be deployed around the world?
Oh, I think that's very important. They're the ones making, the decision of whether or not we go over there. And I think they need to make sure that whatever decision that they make is an informed decision. It's so easy to cast a decision or a vote based off of your, beliefs and opinions and emotions. But I mean, you really have to understand what you're about to do. If they vote yes on sending troops over to a new country, what that's going to mean when they return home. Because I don't think that decision, or I don't think those thoughts were of thought process in 2001 and 2002 when we decided to send more and more troops over there. Because now we have all of these broken human beings back in the country, and no one knows what to do with them now. And so if you're going to send them, you got to mend them. And the only way that we can do that now is by fixing the VA healthcare system.
You're absolutely right. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think this will definitely be something that we'll have to continue working on, and getting the word out and all the rest. I want to now ask you, what can Americans do to help veterans? I know that you've mentioned organizations and all that, but is there anything else you like to add about how the American people can get involved in caring for those who served?
Yeah, absolutely. If they are financially able to, I highly recommend donating to Friends in Service of Heroes, and you can do that at friendsandserviceofheroes.org, or you can just be a compassionate human being. That is totally free. You don't have to do anything except for love and care and support our troops when they return home.
Wonderful. And how can people follow you on it, whether on social media or another platform where they can learn more about what you do and a little bit about the journey that you're taking on?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can follow me at Miss Gilbert AZ. That's on Instagram and Facebook. I post a majority of Friends and Service related hero items on those platforms. You can also follow me on my personal social media, which is at Danielle Skranak. I regularly post other content about veterans and social impacts there. And you can always feel free to personal message me about any questions that you may have.
Well, Danielle, thank you so much for being on the show today. I think your sharings have been spectacular, so inspirational, from your background to your advocacy work to the perspectives that you raise about the VA, about other issues facing veterans. You really are such an inspirational woman, and I cannot thank you enough, not just for your service, but also the service of our armed forces and our veterans. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
And that will wrap up our episode today. Thank you to the audience for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did and you like this podcast, make sure you subscribe and share this show with your friends and family. I really appreciate all of your support. Have a great rest of your day and rest of your week, and I'll see you next time.